Okay, so I described this switch function in another video. I'll put a link to it in the notes for this. And I've mentioned it on Lua, subreddit Lua. And I got a little bit of pushback, which I wasn't really expecting, because I was just saying, hey, this is something I do and think it's interesting, and people went, oh, just use if-elseif, and this is not a rebuttal as such, but an investigation. The other thing is performance issues that may or may not be important to others, right? And my motivation for this switch statement is because Lua doesn't have the switch function, is because Lua doesn't actually have a switch statement, and I find, coming from another language, especially after 40 years of programming, I kind of reached for it and it wasn't there. And I know this is common, especially when, introducing new, experienced programmers to Lua for the first time. They kind of go, oh, why isn't there? And I thought, well, it's relatively easy to make. There's nothing not Lua-y about writing a function that you give a table to operate on. That seems the most Lua-y thing you can make, really. It's 2 lines of code, and as I say, I'll make a link to the bit, and there is some pushback, but some of it's opinion, and that's fine. Some of it's sort of, what about performance? And that's like, well, you have to measure it. So I did. So these are the things. So here's the thing, right? I've expanded initially I only really had the 2 main cases, which of course is trivial. And also this is returning like this string. That's, again, this function is really trivial, doesn't do anything. But that I was just trying to show the shape of calling the switch function. Now you'll notice I've put the cases here, and I've moved the cases into a table outside. I'll show you why. But I don't have a problem with that personally, and I like to have, my decision tables, if you like, really clear and really upfront. But that might be just to taste. So issue number 1 is ergonomics. Is this nicer or to read and more easily understandable than this version, which is using if-elseif? Now, I would argue, till the cows come home, yeah, listing your cases, in this case they're numbers, so they have to be in brackets, but and like this is far better to read than having to parse every individual else if. There's a principle here of don't repeat yourself, which again you may or may not adhere to, but I mean, this else if x equal it takes one accidental I can't type in, it takes one not equal, or anything can happen here. You can forget, actually when I first wrote all these out, I missed out the 15 case because I'm a dumbo. And I didn't miss it out in this case because it's easier to see. So even when I'm trying to do, I just find personally a whole cascade of else if really quite difficult to understand, difficult to parse, and it's not really putting the information up front. Now, I think someone would have maybe done it like this. So you right, you can kind of compress this a little bit, and then you've got the nice linear 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, it's out of order with, out of indentation with the 1. Unfortunately, my reformatter doesn't like that, and I'm not changing my reformatter to accept, for this exception. I don't think I want the rest of my if-elseif, if I ever use it, to do that. So I originally did write it out in the slightly more compact form, but as soon as I save it, I'm back to spread out. So in my view, this is worse than this. Okay, there's a, I'm obfuscating the fact that we've got this call to switch X cases, which you don't have here. I think we're really nitpicking at this point. Now, in my original example, I would have put inline to this cases. Now, that is a performance hit. In fact, let's just demonstrate that. Let's just make a new. Let's put this table in line here, yeah? Okay. So that is like how I sort of demonstrate, although with the trivial 1, 2 and default cases. Now, this, if you care about performance, you don't want to do this, because this you'll almost certainly causing a lot of time to be wasted creating these functions and calling closures, etc. So there's a fair criticism there that that is a problem. But if you discover it's a problem, and it is it's a 10 times hit on this in my, actually let's run the code. So that's 4.3 milliseconds as opposed to 0.4. So yeah, a considerable hit. So if you measure it and go, well, I don't like that, then, which is what I did, then you can go back to this version, which I would probably end up with anyway, because I prefer to, as I say, be upfront about my data. And I'd consider conditional code like the root of all evil, so I try to make it more data orientated and lookup-y as soon as I can. We can show you that a 0.43 milliseconds average execution compared to 0.54, so it's faster. And let me repeat that. This, with just that small change, becomes faster than this, and I believe it's more readable. Okay, now I've done another, but obviously if we're talking about such a trivial thing as encoding numbers as into the kind of English string equivalent, English word equivalent, you wouldn't use this anyway. You would make this table, so you would miss out the function call altogether, which I've demonstrated in the third one in here, which is again twice as fast as the if-elseif. So I mean, you definitely, if you care about performance and readability, and it was this trivial, you would be using this lookup table version for sure. And that's kind of the point. This is what a switch statement is in C, is a lookup table of functions, which is kind of just what I tried to recreate. That's all I did. There's a kind of kind of more intense discussion about it than I thought I'd get, and that's partly my fault for not making a more interesting example. I've also dialed down some of the things, so the way you can massively change these numbers is by changing. So originally when you would have so you wouldn't have this. So originally what I was doing when I was measuring performance was didn't have this for loop. I'll tell you what, I'm going to write some code. going to say n and use n here. So that's the number of, basically I didn't want to use a random number function. I've got 20 cases, then the rest is defaults. So rather than having a random number, I just run through 1 to n 100 times. So let's call that m. To try and simulate, again, this is, we don't know. This is the point about performance test. You know, you cannot use your human brain and patterns in use, language uses to know what's happening. You have to experiment. So that should give me the same results as before. You just whack that out. Okay. Now, originally, when I did this and I replied to Reddit about my 1.5 times in speed up, it was this. This was actually 10,000, which is huge, yeah? It's a little bit unfair. So we've got with functions 1.24 milliseconds. Else if, actually I've improved it somehow. 1.35, switch without functions 0.73. I don't know how I've managed to improve that from my first one. Well, maybe this was even higher, which might be even more unfair. Yeah, I'm not sure about that, to be honest. But anyway, you can see, oh, it's because I've got one, n is 1, sorry. Oh, and I'm using I, yeah, sorry. I'm not, no. So I would have been doing that. Trying to reproduce stuff I did earlier now. Don't know. My thing is, if you don't, so that I should make n equal 10,000, m equal 1. Okay. So, and this is so this is changing. I goes from 1 to 10,000. Just do it once. Now, to be more realistic, what I was doing is like you increase m and decrease n. So it depends what numbers you think you're going to hit in here. You know, you can play around with these and find the breaking, you know, where the best case scenario, which I had earlier, or the worst case scenario. I think like the sort of really bad case for the ifs is this one. No, for the functions is that one, right? And that's going through, basically I'm only hitting the if once because n is 1, right? But I'm doing it 10,000 times, so that is the best case for the if thing because it hits it the first time. As you see, the more you fiddle with these numbers, the more you can like experiment and see where the crossover performance, where one matches performance and when the other one gains performance over the other. And that's what I mean by you just have to test and like figure out the use case that you've got. Now, if you if if obviously in the if thing you want to bias it so that the most likely thing comes first, because that's the first thing you're going to test. So again, to make this optimal in performance, we might have to rearrange this, not in numerical order, which makes sense for a programmer, but in sort of performance order, which is going to be changeable, and someone could really affect the performance of something. Say, like the 19 or 20 is the most common things. You really need them to be at the front of this if statement, because otherwise you're just, for no reason, going through all of the numbers to hit the most common cases. So you have to be careful about the order of this in order to maintain the performance you've got. Unless you're going to document this and test this regularly, you are going to have someone come in and reorder this. And then you're going to have a performance hit and no one's going to know why. And that's the danger of kind of relying on what I call a kind of code-orientated solution to something, as opposed to this. This is data, right? This is just data. The order doesn't matter. It's a table lookup. It's going to be consistent in the amount of time it uses. It may take longer in some circumstances. It may, in obviously the more complex this matching is, the more cases it has, the faster this becomes compared to the if-elseif construct. So it swings and roundabouts. There isn't a perfect right answer to this. As I say, you can fiddle around with how many hit, what your hit percentage is going to be, and where your hotspots are going to be. So say your hotspots are around 11, 12, 13, you're still going through 11 pointless checks to hit 11, right? If that's your most common case, So I think if this was a dice roll of D20, then it wouldn't, you'd get bell curve of performance. So you'd get inconsistencies there. Which is obviously fine in most cases, probably. But these are things you have to be aware of. You can't just say this is faster without knowing what's calling it in what circumstances. And likewise, I can't say this is always faster. And I didn't. This is faster in many cases. The intuition is that it should be faster. As a lookup table rather than, in fact, all along we've got the sort of the really trivial example of the lookup table, which of course is always faster than the with functions. So that is really all I want to say. Is like I tried to sort of show a really simple idea, and I'm welcome discussion on it. But I think we always fall into trap as programmers, leaping to conclusions about performance without actually measuring them. And I thought it'd be interesting to start measuring the performance and see what makes the variables you have to adjust to show good performance versus bad performance. As I say, if I increase this n, decrease the m, or just even make it 10, I think I'll show a different performance profile. And here we have the switch with function 8.58 milliseconds compared to 13.78 compared with 6.77. So still slower than the just straightforward lookup, faster than using if-else cascade. So it's always a choice between different priorities. My priority is always going to be about clarity. Programmers, progs before cogs, as I say. Programmers first, then optimize for the machine afterwards. And to me, this is more optimal in terms of readability, understandability, changeability. The fact that it's we can set up this table in advance. There are lots, it's easier to, if you were setting a breakpoint here in this switch, you then have to kind of wait for it to hit the right thing. So, it's going to be a pain in the butt if you're looking at, and if X is 20, obviously you can read it and then set the breakpoint afterwards, or you can, in this switch, just set the breakpoint here and it will leap directly to your 20 clause. So for me, there are distinct advantages to using this. I'm not saying everyone should do it and never ever do if-else, but I don't think if-else is particularly nice. And many other languages have, I'm not inventing Switch. It's been in C from the beginning, I believe, and there's a reason for it. This if-elseif construct has many issues in my view. So that is all for this video. There's a few things I'll link to in the notes, because there's some interesting stuff about Switch. Turns out I'm not the only person to have thought about Switch in Lua, and there's a lot of other ways to implement it, some even worse performing than others. But it's nice to know there are alternative ways of making a kind of conditional execution of a block of code. Okay, that's it for now.